And right here, official history begins to fall apart. Stop for a second and zoom in on the picture in your mind. Where the clearing runs into the horizon, you can see a dark rectangle, like a gate or a frame. There are no people nearby who could give a clear sense of scale, but there is one small thing, an old wooden cart, half collapsed, left off to the side. The wheel is normal-sized, and against that wheel, the stump looks like a courtroom table. Have you ever noticed how on many such photos, the photographers avoid putting a clear human scale in the frame, as if the frame itself is afraid of being exposed? And now, one more visual anomaly: stairs on the stump. On several shots, you can see notches along the edge of the cut, as if someone carved steps. But these steps are too wide and too high. It's not for climbing up on your knees and sitting. It's for stepping onto it, walking. Superhuman ergonomics in its pure form, a construction that assumes different biomechanics. As an investigator, I always ask a simple question: what task was being solved? The clearing isn't just cutting brush, it's a corridor for transport, for a line, for a flow. Ancient logistics, but without ancient marble, only harsh function. If you make a corridor for hundreds of kilometers, you don't do it for firewood. You do it for a system that has to pass through the forest like through fabric. The official version likes to say the forest was needed for railroad ties, ships, cities. Yes, but then where are the traces of intermediate infrastructure? Where are the warehouse towns, the permanent settlements, the network of roads? On real 19th century projects, you see trash, chaos, barracks, traces of food, horse stables. Here, something else. Here, there's a feeling of sterility, as if the work was done quickly, briefly, without human presence, and then the place was cleaned. And here, official history starts to fall apart a second time. Because if it was ordinary, it would leave ordinary traces. Let's talk about human limits, not abstractly, but concretely. An average worker can swing a 2 to 3 kilogram axe for hours, maybe 5 kilograms in short bursts, but 50 kilograms is a different world. Even lifting it into working position dozens of times is almost impossible without injury. And now imagine the production rhythm. You must fell, limb, cut, drag, stack. This is not a single blow. This is a conveyor. So either the tool belonged to someone other than a human, or the human had a mechanism nearby that took away the weight, the inertia, and the fatigue. And here we return to atmospheric electricity. There are old descriptions of quiet workshops where wheels turned without steam, where the light was white without soot. You can write that off as legend, but legend is sometimes memory that survived fires and renamings. If a system for collecting atmospheric electricity existed, it could power winches and sawmills, and then long saws as long as a car might not have been hand tools, but parts of a mechanism, 2 handles for 2 giants who only guided it, while the heart of the cutting was done by a resonant frame or a pendulum. Have you ever wondered why some old tools look like they were created with total confidence, without trial and error, as if the designer knew exactly for whom and for what? In Britain, there are old forest roads laid out with uncanny straightness in places where the terrain should not allow it without heavy work. In France, corridors through forests that resemble lines of sight as if for optical or energy routes. In Scandinavia, old cuts where the trees seem removed with minimal felling chaos. And in Japan, terraces and water systems in the mountains that look like hydraulics built not by a village but by a state. And here the combination suddenly becomes logical. Giant lumberjacks plus hydraulics. Because if you are rebuilding the world after a mud flood, you need two things: water and wood. Water for washing, for transport, for energy. Wood for frames, for bridges, for ties, for temporary towns. Hydraulics lets you move masses, and giants let you open corridors fast. This is no longer fantasy, it is a reconstruction model. Why would this be hidden? Because the new power did not want you to see a project, it wanted you to see natural development. The Great Reset does not have to be one day and one explosion. It can be a long process of replacing memory. First fires, then concrete, then education reforms, then institutional silence, then denial of the obvious in the form of jokes and memes. Giants? Come on. But there is another motive, much darker. If giants were real labor power, then they were witnesses. Witnesses of technology, witnesses of resource transfers, witnesses that official history is only a facade. Witnesses are not left behind. Witnesses are either integrated, isolated, or destroyed, and then they are turned into a fairy tale so that nobody asks questions. Now, a short detective experiment. Imagine you find an old roadside inn in the taiga. The door is tall, the threshold is like a bench, the step before the entrance is so high it feels wrong. You lift your leg higher than it should, and then you see a trace, a notch on the tree next to the entrance. The notch is not at hand height, the notch is at chest height, but not your chest, someone else's, someone taller. And here, official history starts to fall apart a third time. Because this is not architectural accident. This is standardization for a different height and a different stride. Technological focus, step 3, the geometry of domes as an antenna. I know it sounds crazy when we're talking about forest, but look at the clearing lines as wires without wires. Straight corridors could be not only transport corridors, but energy ones. A clean line for transmission, for resonance, for controlling the field. If domes in cities collected atmospheric electricity, then forest corridors could be its channels. That is why they are so straight. That is why they were made quickly. That is why people do not like to describe them, because then you would have to explain not only the forest, but what the forest was needed for. And now, return to the photograph. Stump platforms are not just waste. They are platforms. You can place mechanisms on them. You can stack metal on them. You can set a winch node on them. And under them, what? Cavities, storage, anchor points. The taiga knows how to hide, but it does not know how to lie. The liar is the one who describes the taiga in a textbook. And here I pause, the way a narrator pauses in a dark video. Have you ever wondered why we are shown the forest as chaos of nature, but in old materials it looks like an engineer's plan? They will tell us it is just 19th century logging. People were tough. Sometimes the scale on photos was exaggerated. But let us look at the facts the way an investigator would, without romance, with a tape measure in the head.
If a stump has a diameter of 2 to 3 meters, the tree must have been enormous. Fine, nature can produce giants. But explain another thing. How in the deep taiga, without roads, without intermediate warehouses, without visible camps, without the logistics of bringing food, metal, pitch, rope, and horses, how did they make a clearing perfectly straight? Now about the tools. A 50-kilogram axe is not heavy. It is impossible for an average human in a working day routine. A strike with such mass requires either superhuman ergonomics or a mechanism that carries the inertia. And when, on another photo, there is a saw as long as a car, with teeth like a sawmill blade, and handles spaced at a distance that fits not 2 people, but 2 beings with a stride of 1.5 meters, then the legend of ordinary lumberjacks becomes a denial of the obvious. Official historians love simple answers, because simple answers have no one guilty. But in simplicity, there is a crack. It does not explain excessive precision. It does not explain why some roadside inns and taiga thresholds are built for a stride of 1.5 meters. It does not explain why old forest cabins have high thresholds and wide benches, as if they were made for those who do not sit down, but lower themselves. And most importantly, it does not explain why all around this there is institutional silence. Neither textbooks nor museums like the theme of giant stumps. They either do not notice it or reduce it to a curiosity. Global context. Now, let us take one step aside and see that this is not a Siberian oddity. Look at old photos of Canada, straight clearings cutting through swamps as if by a ruler. Look at Northern Europe, level corridors through forests where the timber looks as if it was removed with minimal felling mess. Look at Australia, old tracks laid with such geometric stubbornness that a question appears: who measured and who chopped? And in the United States, forest roads that appear on maps faster than they should at the pace of manual labor. Coincidence? When a coincidence repeats on different continents, it stops being coincidence. It becomes a sign of a system. And if the system worked globally, it means it had a global order and a global goal. Quickly obtain resources, quickly clear territory, quickly prepare land for new cities. Have you ever wondered why new 19th century cities sometimes grow as if the site for them was already prepared by someone else? Technological focus. Now, attention. What kind of operation could demand such scale and such precision? Here we run into 3 words that academic committees grimace at, but which appear again and again in old testimonies. Atmospheric electricity. If you control atmospheric electricity, you control power without wires and without coal. And if you have power, you have mechanisms. Imagine logging where the main instrument is not hands, but a system. Giant lumberjacks did not simply chop, they worked like living cranes, picked up trunks, turned them, stacked them into even piles. Their superhuman ergonomics let them do what for us requires an excavator. And nearby could exist simple mechanisms based on atmospheric electricity, lifts, winches, quiet sawmills without smoke. That is why on many shots there is no soot, no camp chaos, none of the dirt that a human mass leaves, as if the forest was processed the same way material is processed in a workshop, fast and clean. And now let us look at the geometry of domes. Yes, domes. Why am I suddenly talking about domes when we speak of taiga? because after mud flood, when old cities partly sank into the ground, the new power needed resources to restore infrastructure, metal, stone, wood. The domes of old buildings in many cities looked like elements of energy architecture, like collectors. The geometry of domes repeats principles of field concentration. If these systems existed, they had to be not simply destroyed, they had to be deprived of power. And for that, resources were needed, a lot of resources. And the taiga was the answer. Conspiracy motive. Here a question appears that makes the room quieter. Who benefits from hiding that there was another labor force and another technology? Those who came after. The new administration of the world after the Great Reset. When a reset happens, legitimacy is built on two things: control of resources and control of history. If people learn that before them there were technologies of atmospheric electricity, other logistics, other scales of labor, they will start asking questions, and questions are a threat. Therefore, the best strategy is not to refute, but to silence. Institutional silence works better than censorship. Simply don't mention it.
Do not put it in programs. Do not give researchers grants. And physical traces, destroy. Fire, perfect. How many archives accidentally burned in the 19th and 20th centuries? Concrete? Even better. Cover old foundations, raise the soil level, turn an anomaly into a norm. Renaming? Classic. Where giant stations become forestry offices, where energy towers become bell towers, where collectors become decoration. And what to do with the giants themselves? If they were needed by the new power to quickly clear territory for new cities, then they were used as a temporary instrument. After the work is finished, any instrument that can raise questions about truth becomes dangerous. They got rid of them. Isolation, resettlement, epidemics, wars, mythologization. Giants turned into a fairy tale about forest spirits or into embarrassed folklore. That is how denial of the obvious works. Reality is moved into legend, and legend is moved into laughter. And here we return to the photo. The silence of the taiga in the frame is not romance. It is a crime scene that has yet received a report. A giant stump platform is not a curiosity. It is a seal of scale. A straight clearing is the signature of technology. A 50-kilogram axe and a saw the length of a car are not exotic. They are the key to the question: who was the real workforce of the world's restoration? A scene for your imagination. Night. The quiet sound of paper. I sit over a copy of an old forestry plan. On it, the same clearing lines. They go not as convenient, but as necessary. I overlay this plan onto a later map and see something strange. The lines match future telegraph routes, future roads, future borders of administrative districts. As if first they laid a corridor, and then they adjusted the country to it. Ancient logistics. It creates a skeleton, and only then civilization is hung onto it. Have you ever wondered why borders sometimes look like they were drawn not by politicians, but by engineers? I turn the page and find a description of night work. No date, no signature, only phrases: after a storm, and when the air rings. It can be metaphor, but if this is a description of the moment when atmospheric electricity becomes maximally available, then a storm is not a threat, but a resource. Then it becomes clear why some operations could be done fast and without smoke. The energy was in the air, and they took it. Now, mud flood as the background. After the Great Silting, cities need not only stone, they need wooden infrastructure for restoring canals, bridges, rails, warehouses. Wood is the temporary bone of the world, and if you have giants, you can do in a season what human crews would spend decades on. That is exactly how the 19th century looks on paper: too many building miracles in too short a time. And here, official history starts to fall apart a fourth time, because its calendar cannot carry its own volumes. But what happened then? After restoring the skeleton of the world, giants became unnecessary, and not just unnecessary, dangerous. A new power that rewrites the past cannot allow the existence of living proof. So empty zones appear, closed districts, special settlements. Stories appear about wild and dangerous beings to justify isolation. Folklore appears where real history hides under the mask of fear. And one more stroke of the conspiracy: renaming space. Old names that could contain technological hints disappear. An energy station becomes a monastery. A collection tower becomes a lighthouse. A field corridor becomes a logging cut. This is not fantasy. It is a method of masking. Change the word and you change the thought. Denial of the obvious begins with vocabulary. Now return to your senses. You are driving, or in headphones, or at home. Imagine you touch the wood of such a roadside inn, a crack in the log, polished by thousands of touches, but for some reason that polish is higher than a child can reach, and a bit higher than is comfortable for an adult. As if those who passed here did not bend down, as if those who lived here had a threshold up to the knee as a normal thing. And here official history starts to fall apart a fifth time, because your legs, your height, your stride suddenly become an instrument for measuring truth. If briefly the chain looks like this: anomaly of scale, tools unsuitable for humans, straight clearings as engineered corridors, lack of human traces of camps, presence of non-standard ergonomics in cabins and yards, institutional silence, fires, concrete, renaming, fairy tale instead of history. And now, when you see this chain, try to take one more step. Think of giants not as a myth, but as a resource, as an erased workforce of the past, used to rebuild the world, and then crossed out like an unnecessary line in a ledger. Because in a world after the Great Reset, there is one rule: everything that does not fit the new textbook either burns or sinks into concrete or disappears under a new name.
Let us do a final check, almost laboratory-like. Imagine two crews. The first, humans with 3 to 5 kilogram axes, with horses, with carts, with campfires. They leave traces: trampled ground, piles of bark, smoke, stench, chaotic mess. The second, giants, next to mechanisms powered by atmospheric electricity, with hydraulics for sending logs down rivers, with corridor lines of clearings where every meter is thought through. They leave a different handwriting: clean geometry, speed, absence of everyday noise. Now look at old photos and ask yourself, which handwriting do you see? And here, official history starts to fall apart one last time, because it asks you not to look, but to believe. The next time you come across a shot with giant stump platforms, do not pass by. Ask yourself 2 questions. First, for whom was this convenient? Second, why was I not told about this? Because institutional silence never appears by accident. It is a tool. And now, the main question I leave you with, like a key on the table. If the forest was cut by ordinary people, why are old forest cabins and thresholds in Taiga roadside inns built for a stride of 1.5 meters? And why does this fact not cause panic in textbooks? Maybe because panic is the beginning of freedom, and freedom is the end of control. So what exactly was the restoration of the world after mudflood? Heroic human labor? Or a cold global project using an erased workforce that was later turned into legend? Have you ever wondered why legends are sometimes more accurate than documents? And if you feel a slight discomfort right now, that is normal. That is how truth works when it is touched without gloves. It does not shout, it whispers. Look again. Look at the clearing lines. Look at the tools that do not fit human hands. Look at thresholds designed for a stride of 1.5 meters. And then ask, who benefited from you calling it a weird thing instead of a trace of a system? Because while we argue about myths, concrete keeps covering clues. And while archives burn, only fragments remain in memory. Maybe the Great Reset is still going on now, just quietly. And if tomorrow someone says, do not think, remember that stump, and listen to the silence.